Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll probably wait a couple minutes just to see if we have any stragglers, and then we'll get into it. But in the meantime, so there's not just dead air, I figured we could talk about something that's happening right now. So, Justin, you had an idea.
Yeah, as we all are seeing in the news right now, the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed yesterday morning, and it, besides the loss of life, which we will not cover during this conversation, there is an impact to those of us in the logistics world. Not only was this uh, a highway that a lot of goods would be moved on, but also the bridge is blocking the bay where uh, where the cargo facility is. So what we may see is that cargo ships are probably going to have to divert to another place to unload, which may cause, at least the way I'm thinking about it, it may cause some excess excess work at locations that were not set up for it. If you are bringing new goods in and they're coming in on the East Coast, you may have a couple of day delay to turn around and move to various other ports and go forward like that. So it's definitely something that will affect us beyond the lives lost. Greg or Steve, did you guys have any input on that bridge collapse, and more importantly, how the loss of infrastructure will affect, or at least minorly affect, logistics for the next little while?
Yeah, I mean I mean like you mentioned, I mean, first of all is the loss of life aspect. And frankly that as bad as that was, it could have been way worse had that happened in a much busier time on the bridge. Um, the other aspect of it, though, from a logistics perspective, is Baltimore is one of the largest ports on the East Coast. It's in the top 10 for international cargo, and to that point, ships are en route. I mean, they're going to have to go somewhere, and there are obviously a lot of other ports on the East Coast, but to ramp up capacity quickly, I think it's going to be challenging. I think we should expect delays in the supply chain world for sure.
Yeah. Greg, any thoughts?
Yeah, obviously there's going to be an impact at the ports, having to push vessels to offload in New York, New Jersey, or down in Norfolk as an alternative. But then you have to deal with if your distribution center might be close proximity to the Baltimore port, then how are you going to get the freight or your container inland to your facility? So there's going to be a lot of choke points along the way. And certainly the disruption is going to be felt for quite some time, as the port probably will not reopen for weeks, months, at least based on the initial news that's coming out.
Yeah, and this isn't the first time, even in this decade, that we've seen it's the most tragic thing we've seen with a bridge collapse, but it's not the only bridge related issue that we've seen. Couple of years ago, I'm not going to get this bridge right. The bridge between Cincinnati and Kentucky, a very large flaw was found in the bridge. They immediately shut it down, and it was shut down for several weeks as they fixed that bridge. And basically 20% of U.S. commerce had to be diverted to various other bridges, highways, and things of that nature. So I think as we look at the state of U.S. infrastructure, we're probably going to have to worry about infrastructure concerns going forward. And I think with that, we've probably done our 5 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you guys for that commentary. So I just want to officially welcome everyone to our webinar today. From Research to Decision, a deep dive into shipping software selection. Just a quick couple things for housekeeping. So you should be seeing something that looks a little bit like this, where our faces are in the top left. There is a box on the right that if you do have any questions during this session, please feel free to submit them at any time. We have some time scheduled at the end of the hour to discuss those questions. And then we do have some links for downloads as well. So please let us know if you're having any issues or if you have questions. We'd love to hear them. Now for introductions, my name is Taylor Pualka. I'm the Director of Marketing at ProShip. I've been at ProShip for about 8 years, and I'm excited to do my first live webinar. So with that, I will kick off introductions with Justin and the rest of our panel.
Hi, everybody. Justin Kramer, co-founder of ProShip. I've had the luxury and privilege of being able to be in this industry for over 20 years, to work on customers that some of them span multiple continents. Some of them have exceeded 1 million packages a day, and it's been quite the education. Greg?
Yeah, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Greg Mao, I'm the Director of Global Logistics and Transportation at Crocs, Inc., which covers both brands, Crocs and Hey Dude. I've been here now for just over 5 years. Prior to that, 31 years at UPS. So I've got you beat, Justin, in terms of the transportation industry. Over 35 years of experience. Glad to be here.
And hey, good morning, good afternoon to everybody on the East Coast. Good morning to everyone else. Steve Conger, Senior Director of Systems for Saddle Creek Logistics. Been with Saddle Creek about 8.5 years. And for those who don't know what Saddle Creek is, we're a nationwide third-party logistics company, about 55 locations, 35 million square feet of warehouse space under our control that we operate. I oversee a few different functional areas of systems at Saddle Creek, but as related to today, I oversee our parcel shipping systems and all of our parcel management solutions as well. I also oversee our company's tech roadmap when it comes to our fulfillment business and our direct-to-consumer offerings to our clients. Prior to Saddle Creek, I was at Fanatics for just under 12 years, oversaw order management, warehouse management, and parcel transportation systems for Fanatics as well. So, Greg, you got me beat as well. I got about 20 years of experience here.
All right. Thank you all. And we thought we'd do something different to start us off here. We have a poll. So what is your ideal way to unwind outside of work? We'd like to get to know our audience just a little bit better. So if you'd like to choose one of the options on your screen there, that would be great. What about you, Justin? What do you like to do?
Oh, I'm kind of torn between, and I wouldn't call it relaxation and exercise, I call it recovery and exercise, and then a little bit of tech time. Gotta spend time with the computer or the PlayStation or whatever you've got.
Awesome. What about you, Steve?
Right now, the biggest interest I have is family time. So I proud to be my daughter's, I have twin 6-year-old daughters, and I am very happy to be their T-ball coach. We had a game last night. We lost. We're not going to talk about that. But it's really a lot of fun, and they are they are arguably, not just because I'm partial, the best two on the team in terms of hitting. They're really taken to it well. It's been fun.
That's awesome. What about you, Greg?
Well, family time, I think, is probably should be at the top of everybody's list, but it's also at mine. I also like to get outdoors and golf, and I live in Colorado, so hiking is a great thing that we like to do on the weekends with my wife and kids when they're available as well.
All right, that's great. All right, I'm going to show the results here. Oh, I thought family time would be number one, but it looks like the relaxation and exercise. It's definitely up there. important. All right, thanks everyone for participating. We appreciate it. Now just going through our agenda quickly. So we're gonna just spend a couple minutes on the post-peak that just happened. Decoding the buyer's journey, that's gonna be the biggest piece of today's webinar. Go through some success stories and then some final advice and then Q&A from the team. So let's start with peak season. Just happened. It's usually a chaotic time for everybody. Maybe not as chaotic as it usually is, but let's jump in with what we think about it. Steve, let's start with you.
Sure. So to your point about as much, it wasn't quite as chaotic as it could have been. In peak of 21, it was probably the worst time in history to find capacity with parcel carriers. My condolences for anybody that had to renegotiate their carrier contract during that time. It was not very pleasant. Fast forward 2 years, and we've seen a few changes. So, for example, the carrier capacity as a percentage has gotten way better. There's a lot more capacity out there. Carriers aren't just turning away volume because you're, 2 packages over your allotment of what they expect. We've also seen a bit of a rise in regional carriers, where OnTrack probably makes the most news, given that they're now covering around 80% of the U.S. population with their network. There's a lot of other regionals out there, folks like LSO, folks like Ohio. There's a lot of other options out there, and there's a lot more ways to move packages, whether they be like postal consolidators or even last mile delivery folks. So, it gives a lot of options to shippers who are looking to either renegotiate the contract or find better ways to serve their customers.
Yeah, and Steve, you make a good point. There's if I had to say one thing about what the carrier landscape has looked like since 2000, I would use the word volatility. And what we will say is over the last several years, we've seen that capacity grow. We've seen the sheer number of carriers grow. But what we're also starting to see is what we expected this year, which is maybe a little bit of contraction, maybe a little bit of merging between carriers. So as we go forward, we're definitely recommending that due to the lack of funding for some carriers, due to where the VC markets are right now, make sure that you understand how your carriers work. And you really don't just want to add carriers for capacity's sake, like we did in 2001, 2002, right? We really want to ensure that we're rationalizing these carriers, not just diversifying.
Yeah, you make a good point, Justin. The volatility in both the carrier space and even the supply chain tech space has been crazy and higher than ever. And Greg, in this environment of change, it's crucial to have a strategy surrounding risk. Is that something you can touch on?
Yeah, certainly. So as I think the challenges that we were preparing for coming out of 2020, 2021, 2022, had everybody like on pins and needles. How is it going to work in 2023? Fortunately, capacity was readily available, but we went into our entire peak season planning with a theme of de-risk. Make sure that you're prepared for any kind of disruption, capacity constraints, et cetera. And we went so far as to modify how we were fulfilling orders so that we did not limit ourselves within the 4 walls of our distribution center. That ended up creating some unique challenges from a fulfillment perspective, but we were able to meet our obligations and exceed our obligations in terms of SLAs of getting product to customers well in advance of Christmas. So really was a different kind of approach this year versus before, chasing after capacity and making sure you had partners lined up that could support you.
That point, Greg. De-risk, that's huge. All right, so let's move into the meat of our discussion today, decoding the buyer's journey for supply chain tech. really we see 5 different stages when someone's going through this process and searching for a new technology to fit into their stack. So that starts with awareness, goes through research, evaluation, final selection, and then implementation and optimization. So jumping into awareness, let's start with you, Greg. What are some of the things that help with this stage?
Well, I think maybe it would be helpful to just mention how things were set up when I first got to Crocs. And in that particular time frame back in 2019, we were manifesting everything directly with our WMS. We had a direct relationship there. We did not have any kind of a multi-carrier solution in place. And when we wanted to look at how could we make changes that would bring benefits to the company, as well as provide better service to our customers, we found that there was a long roadmap and a lot of money that we would have to spend to make that happen. So we went through a whole process of identifying we need something different. This isn't going to work. We need to be nimble and quick to be able to contract or expand our carrier base. So we circled up and created a team of stakeholders, everything from our IT team to our digital team, retail sales channel representation, and our operations, making sure everyone was aligned on what did we need out of a solution. And then we were able to then scope out basically a scope of work and identify who could meet our specific needs moving forward. So the awareness phase, I think, really led us to a group consensus of how we needed to move forward.
That's a good point. And Steve, I know in our past conversations, you mentioned the who are you, who do you want to be mentality. Could you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I really, love some of the things that Greg said there, because, gone are the days where the shipping happens in like a stank office in the back corner of the warehouse. Like that just isn't the way shipping works anymore. And, shipping is something that touches every department. It really does. It touches, for a retailer, it touches merchandising, it touches marketing, it touches operations, it touches tech. It touches everybody. It touches customer service. So having everybody, involved and getting a stakeholder from all these departments, I think is critical to do that. Because to that point, since shipping doesn't just touch the warehouse, you really need to understand, how do you ship? How do you want to ship? What do you want to do with shipping? How does that play into merchandising? How does that play into operations? How does that play into customer service? Into how you buy merchandise, or how you select merchandise? How you might use it to raise your average order value on your website? It really touches all those areas. And if you don't have people from all those departments involved and more, then you're really, in my opinion, looking at it in a very short-sighted way.
Yeah, so it seems like the awareness stage is actually bigger and takes a lot more thought than maybe some people think. So moving down to research, Justin, I'd like to kick it off with you from a vendor's perspective for this stage.
Yeah, and the thing I would say is when you're doing research, there's a lot of things you can look at. You can talk to the carriers, you can talk to other people in your industry. But the one thing that we're seeing come back, and we're seeing a significant increase in customer satisfaction with this, is have your vendors actually come out to one of your more challenging locations, whether that's a store or a warehouse. Let them actually see the facility and see how they respond, how they react. Though with today's, like we are right now, a virtual webinar where some of us aren't even in the same states as one another, it's great for moving business along. But when it really comes to truly understanding where a shipper is and what their challenges truly are, nothing beats an actual on-site walkthrough. So that as you're doing that research phase, and you're gathering all that information from the web and peers and things of that nature, take the time to actually pull your vendors on site, and you get a significantly more information from that vendor, and the vendor will get more information from you as you go along.
That's a good point, Justin. And it was really hard in the times of COVID where that definitely stopped. But now that there's no travel restrictions and people are more easily able to do that is huge. Greg, I'd like to go to you next. I know you're a huge fan of using your network and your peers. So how did that play out for you?
Yeah, thank you. In research phase, but what we did instead is whether it be at conferences or just getting to know other companies in the industry, retailers that perhaps were not direct competitors, and just really talking through what did you do, how did you go about it, what do you like about the provider that you have today, what challenges have you seen come up since you've implemented. Just really trying to understand what was out there, whose name keeps surfacing over and over again, really helped us to come to a short list pretty quickly of who we wanted to engage directly. And that's the way we went about it.
Wonderful. And then moving to Steve, what about trade shows? How big of or I guess what would be the strategy? I know it's a lot of people's strategies to go to trade shows, but when you do go to one, what do you recommend?
So, yeah, I mean, I think trade shows are very important, especially if you're really trying to get a cross section of the market and understand what you're looking for. But, one thing I'll just say about trade shows, while they're very beneficial, going to trade shows without a plan is the equivalent of taking your 6-year-old to the grocery store without a shopping list. It's going to be a disaster. It's going to be chaotic. They're going to want to look at every cool little widget on the corner and everything like that. And you're not really going to get as good of a view of everything by doing that. So I think it's very important that you go in with a plan. You reach out to vendors prior to getting to the trade show. And, if you, as much as you can, just try to set appointments, make sure you're talking to the right people, make sure you can have your focus time. And I think that's really, really important to doing that. And there's also other resources as well, besides, the ProMats and the Modexes of the world, and parcel forums and things like that. One of the other ways that we look at it is look at your trade organization. So as a 3PL, we have a great trade organization in IWLA that can help and it can create the network that Greg talked about, and you can just hear from other people, the pros and cons of certain vendors and what other people use.
Awesome. That's great, Steve. I'd actually like to bring up a question from the audience. So we got one from Mark when we did the registration, and he asked, what software solution requirements did you feel were the most important, and how did you prioritize these requirements? I guess, Greg, you went through the process relatively more recent than Steve. Is that something you could touch on?
Yeah, can you repeat the question though?
Sure. Yeah. So if you look at your shipping software journey, what software solution requirements did you feel were the most important, and how did you prioritize these requirements? So even talking with other maybe departments on their needs, thinking about the features that kind of stood out to you. Got it.
Okay, so when we were evaluating as a team, having this key stakeholders in play, the IT team candidly drove a lot of that, but we started off with what does the business need, and the IT team knew the connections from we use from our ERP to our WMS and how that was going to feed to a multi-carrier manifesting or shipping solution. So what we were looking for ultimately was we wanted to make sure that carrier connections were in place, that we had all the carriers that we were interested in participating in our overall e-com strategy were able to be added quickly, have the flexibility to add and even remove if someone was underperforming, and be able to turn on and turn off based on business rules that we would have in play. So I think that I'm not going to talk about necessarily the IT or the software stack, but from a flow, we really wanted to make sure that we were nimble and that we were able to be responsive and establish business rules such as regional distribution, weight breaks, etc. So that was kind of our focus.
Thank you. Perfect answer. That kind of brings us into the next category here, which is evaluation and consideration. And Steve, I'm going to start with you on this one. What's one of the first things you should focus on for this stage?
Yeah, and I mean, I'll kick it off by talking about something Greg just said as far as how like things like RFPs and selection processes are led. I am a big fan of them being led by the IT organization. Especially if you don't have a formal procurement organization in your company that does that. I'm a big fan of the IT group leading it. That said, the IT group can't be doing it in a box. That's where they need to bring in the collaboration, work with the different business groups, and understand that and help to craft what those requirements look like. So, for example, it's a lot like interviewing a person. If you're interviewing a person for a job and you're asking a lot of yes or no questions, you're sort of telestrating the answer that you would like from them. Same goes for RFPs. Yes, it makes it a lot easier to score when you do that. However, I think it's really important that you ask a lot of open-ended questions. Let them answer it. Have conversations with candidates, because the fact that by doing that, you're going to be able to understand what they're offering. They're going to understand truly what you're asking, and understand what that looks like. Because especially when you're dealing with shipping software, your shipping profiles are going to vary by location. We're a 3PL, so we also have the aspect of not just by location, but also by which one of our clients we're shipping on behalf of, and that sort of thing. The types of products, the requirements. Some of our clients want everything to be there within 3 days. Some of our clients are looking for a more economy solution, and so on and so forth. But even if you're not a 3PL, you often may have different shipping requirements based on that line of business or that sales channel, where you may want to be able to vary what you have, and making those systems highly configurable is really important as you develop your roadmap on shipping.
That's very true. And I hear that you pointed out carriers a little bit there. And I think that's where I'd like to direct the conversation over to Greg. How important were carrier connections and all the things related to that for your shipping software evaluation?
Well, extremely important. Like I was mentioning earlier, in terms of what we were looking for in a software solution, we wanted to make sure that the number of carriers, first of all, has gone from a handful to 100, and whether it's going to contract or continue to grow, who knows? But there are so many options out there for you. You want to make sure that if you've got your list of who you want to be a carrier for you in any type of solution, that the connection is already established and you're not starting from ground zero trying to have your provider build something out that's going to take months and months of time and effort, and ultimately delay your project as far as onboarding is concerned. So we really started with about 4 or 5 carriers that we had identified that we wanted this solution to support. And we just made sure that all the providers we were evaluating had already built that pipeline of connection with the carrier.
Yeah, having the right carrier connections is absolutely vital. Justin, do you have any other advice on that topic?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I would go to the carriers, right? The reality is as we've talked today, we've talked about peer groups, we've talked about RFPs, we've talked about um, uh, just walking trade show floors and getting advice there, and all these other things that can be done. But let's face it, the carriers know who is doing the best job of providing them with compliant labels, who is making their customers the happiest. So along with that entire group of others that you're looking at, I would recommend you ensure you include the carriers as part of that.
Excellent point. There's another question that came from the audience. So when you're evaluating vendors, when you're in this phase, and it could apply to even a vendor outside of shipping software, was there anything you didn't like in this process, whether that's feature related, things to look out for in pricing, or just communication red flags? Greg, could you start with that question?
Well, I think the biggest thing is making sure that there's great communication between the parties so that you have a clear list of expectations, you have a clear roadmap that you want to follow, and what your timeline is for completing implementation, even if it's not optimized at that point, to have the connection in place. And vice versa, or from the other side, the provider needing to be really clear about what an implementation is going to look like. And from my perspective, asking the questions that you don't think you need to ask in terms of, what are the gotchas out there? What are the delays? What are the things that you found most frequently are going to cause choke points in terms of this implementation? And that really having a strong communication plan and implementation plan, I think, are critical steps that you need to make sure that you're covering.
Good point. Steve, anything you see out there as red flags?
Yeah, I mean, to me is understand the references, and I think this is where the references can really play into your evaluation. Both the references provided by the software partner, because let's be honest, like no software partner is going to give you like the worst reference in the world as saying, hey, call these people. But you can hopefully get some honest answers, but you can also look at through your networks like we talked about. Greg highlighted a few things regarding looking at your proverbial Rolodex. Find out who they're using, and if they're using the software that you're looking at, try to get some inside information. You're not looking for company confidential things, but just general experiences with the company, how they work, how they operate, mannerisms, that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Definitely. And that brings us right into negotiation and selection. So, Steve, you covered consider your references, both provided and not provided. What about carrier certifications and maybe going into that total cost of ownership piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with all the carriers that are out there, understand the two things about it. One, whether the software application is able to ship with that carrier. That's one. And number two, especially when it comes to the big boys, is that piece of software certified with those carriers? Those are two very different things. The FedEx API, for example, and so is UPS's, is pretty much open to anybody who wants to code against it, as long as you go through their testing process and go live. You can write your own shipping software and code against it. That doesn't automatically get you certified by those carriers. And I think that that's really important that you look at if if the software is certified, what level they're certified, because sometimes some of the carriers have different levels. And to understand, because that will also tell you how much of a relationship the software has with them. One of the reasons people buy shipping software is so they don't have to deal with the fact of, carrier X making some change to their label specification. And now you got to jump in 30 days, 60 days, what have you, and say, all right, I guess we got to drop everything and deal with this. That's part of the reason this industry exists, the parcel shipping software industry, in my opinion, as far as the systems go. And then related to ROI, I mean, when we look at software at Saddle Creek, one of the things that we look at is what is the total cost of ownership all in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and so on and so forth. Obviously, past year 5, sometimes that can be a little harder to predict, but you should have an idea of what that's going to look like. And understanding, is this something that you expect to get a return on investment on? If so, great. And what would that return be? And if not, that might be okay as well. Different companies have different needs for why they want to implement shipping software. And, understand just what that cost structure is going to look like, I think is very, very important.
Yeah. So Steve, I do know that every software vendor out there is going to provide an ROI. And at least from our standpoint, when we provide an ROI, it's really to try to support our coaches that are looking at our software, give them those ideas, because let's face it, at the end, this is probably going to go up to a CFO who may have some of the other ideas that we're talking about. And so I understand, take a software vendor's ROI, take it apart. If it's a good ROI, it's going to be broken down by labor, IT, and all the other costs that can be associated before a label actually gets on a package and gets out the door. So we definitely feel that it's a talking point, but very few customers actually buy solely on ROI alone.
Interesting. Thank you, Justin. Greg, I know you touched on it briefly in maybe the last section, but going back to that detailed roadmap of implementation when you're in this final selection process, is there anything else you wanted to point out about that?
Well, since we were in the topic of ROI here just in the last couple of comments, I did want to speak to that as well.
Great.
So as I kind of alluded to before, we started off with a WMS being our shipping solution, and we were isolated with one single carrier. So the whole idea here, was to implement multi-carrier solution that would allow us to rate shop, manage weight breaks, optimize regional distribution, and ultimately an ROI was a very easy outcome for us, simply because if you compare the cost of the shipping solution to optimizing a carrier mix versus having one carrier, it's pretty much a no-brainer. So we were able to pull that off, but that's where we started from, and that's where we're now into a 5-carrier solution at this point. As far as other things that that we really wanted to make sure was part of our selection process, again, was having that detailed roadmap that would allow us an implementation timeline that was going to meet our objectives. One of the things that we dealt with when we actually were onboarding with ProShip was we got started a little bit late, and we also were opening up a brand new distribution center at the very same time. So we had to kind of put a hard stop, line in the sand before we got to peak season, because both were kind of heading towards peak season for full optimization, and we couldn't risk our peak season because of how our DC was just being stood up. So that was, the implementation roadmap was extremely important to us, making sure that you understood any potential delays and that you were avoiding any kind of surprises along the way.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know you had a good point of view for this question about making that realistic implementation plan actually happen in regards to things like code freeze. So it was quite different for you, but you guys made it work, which is awesome. So is there anything else you wanted to talk to? I know we're kind of in this last implementation optimization section.
Who are you sending that to?
Oh, I was talking to Greg. I was just doing a quick follow-up on that because it was the next section here. We might be having some technical difficulties.
All right.
Hold on.
Let me jump in while Greg deals with some minor technical difficulties. I will say one thing that Greg brought up a great point. As you're planning, if you're a shipper and you're planning to do an implementation, timeline matters. And as sometimes maybe it's legal, maybe it's other vendors need to move things in your ERP, your WMS, your OMS. These may do setbacks. So you want to make sure that you set appropriate first year expectations. When you're buying a piece of shipping software, it's something that you should be getting an ROI on, and you should be getting an increased improvement on year after year after year. So make sure that you set realistic first year expectations. For example, if you are a very, very large customer or a very, very large shipper, you should probably be closing your deals right now if you want to go live and you have a Q4 freeze. Now, there are ways to compress that timeline, things of that nature, work with your vendors. But the one thing we definitely want to talk about that you need to understand is time matters. And these are the things that you need to understand is when your decision needs to be made if you want to get a full deployment in that first year. But always remember, year 2, you'll learn more about that software and can do more. Year 3, the same, so on and so forth. Taylor?
Good point, Justin. And Steve, you have a different perspective being a 3PL. Anything about implementation that you'd like to talk to?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few. The interesting thing on implementation for us is, as a 3PL, you're always implementing. It's like from the client side, for example, when we integrate, they integrate with a 3PL and they're done. And they're in a lot of them, especially if it's complex integration, by the end of it, we'll say, okay, glad that's over. For us, we're like, okay, it's Friday. Let's have a good weekend. Monday, we're starting the next project. It's just part of the business to be consistently implementing. So, that brings up a few things as far as how to implement. So one, I think it's very important that you implement this in a manner that can be repeated over and over, and business rules changed easily. Because you're never done when it comes to shipping. There's always going to be something that you want to do, or some new capability, or the market's going to say we need to offer this. That's very important for us as a 3PL to understand what that looks like, and how you can measure that. Is based on a few things. One, opportunities. Two, the market and what that's looking like. So, for example, these are things that sometimes your marketing folks can help with. If you're a retailer, your merchandising team, customer service, they all need to play in to try to calculate what that ROI looks like.
Yeah, so I agree with you there. I do want to point out that, especially as we look deeper into this implementation and optimization, I love that optimization word. Routine improvements, and Steve, you and I, we go back a little bit, and not only as the carriers put out new services, new features, as you change your enterprise software stack, as you look at the way you're going to use labor different in your warehouses, these are all areas where you have an opportunity to go back to your enterprise software stack, and not just in the shipping software, but maybe in the other pieces. Make the changes. Keep the software operating the way you operate to get the best out of it.
Point, Justin. All right. Thank you all for that awesome section there. So I do have a poll for the audience. We're curious, what stage of shipping software selection are you in, if you are in one? Are you looking? Are you just doing research? Are you happy with what you have? So feel free to submit your response. Give you a couple more seconds to do that. Justin, what do you think? What do you think is going to be the leading answer here? What are you hearing on the ground?
Oh, well, I expect people are going to be in just about everywhere. Of course, I would love it if everybody's answer was D and we're on their short list, but but that's probably being a little too optimistic.
Wishful thinking.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, let's see where our responses lie. Definitely a mixed bag. So Justin, you're pretty right. You're pretty close.
Yeah, I would have loved more of those short listings.
All right, I'm going to move on. We're getting close to time here. So let's talk a little bit about quantifying success and the features that are really key in your success in shipping, the improvements, and of course, scalability. So I'm going to kick it off to Greg on the feature side. I know you were mentioning something about carriers. Would you like to talk to that a little bit?
Sure. So again, I would say that the biggest thing for us in this environment is making sure that we have the ability to flex our muscles and expand carriers or contract carriers. And ultimately, it goes back to, for us, de-risking. We want to make sure that we are ensuring that we're going to get the right service providers, covering the right territories, and optimizing our spend, whether that be with one carrier or 5 or 6. So that's kind of the focus or the feature that we were really looking for when shopping.
Awesome. And Steve, what about you? What about business rules or different other offerings?
Yeah, I mean, for us, having some of the reasons we looked at ProShip, we implemented it, were honestly, some of them were just table stakes in the 3PL market. Being able to customize shipping profiles by client, by location, which is necessary because some locations, the client mix may warrant a pickup from a certain carrier that other locations may not warrant, especially depending on the size of the client. The other thing is, for us, we look at our ability to ship and to ship parcel as a competitive advantage. We think we're very good at it. We think that we are able to offer a true tier 1 solution in the market and be able to say, to our clients, we can work with you to save money. So, from a retailer's perspective, most retailers have 3 key costs. 1 is personnel, 2 is cost of goods sold, and 3 is shipping, in any order, of course, depending on the company. But usually those are the big 3 costs for a lot of retailers. And to be able to work with those partners and our clients on how we can craft a shipping program that can be advantageous to our clients, their consumers. I think that's very key. Amazon has taught everyone that shipping is free. Thank you, Prime. But we all know it's not. It is very expensive. Costs as a whole are not going down. And to be able to remain competitive in your marketplace is something that we take very, very seriously.
Yeah, and you pointed it out there, right? Those 3 major costs, labor being a big one, and it's something that I think that shippers need to look at the fact that where does the labor really help? In a good shipping software, you should be able to automate things, and that doesn't mean just picking the right carrier or things of that nature. But if you have regulated materials of any sort, dangerous goods, IATA, 49 CFR. TGD or whatever, depending upon the country that you're in, being able to do a lot of that in an automated fashion, reducing fines while increasing compliance, and now you can take your labor and you can shift them to areas where people really make a difference, whether it's packaging, presentation, QA, something of that nature. And that's just really something that, let's face it, 1 or 2 dangerous goods fines, and all of a sudden that ROI calculation changes completely. Greg, let me throw it over to you. We might have lost Greg. Taylor,
Sorry.
let me.
Sorry about that.
No
Got
problem.
me? Okay. I was just on mute for a moment. So, the one thing that we've been looking at specifically outside of the de-risk component is really what's the long term, what's the next step for us. When we take a look at our current relationship with ProShip, it's isolated to one shipping location. It's the main Crocs distribution center. We're also looking at scalability. How do we expand that? We have acquired a new brand, Hey Dude, 2 years ago, and they've just stood up their first distribution center. And so we're now leaning into that and flexing our muscles and getting ProShip implemented at that location as well. So one of the things that we really took into consideration is how easy is that for us to flex out, to be able to expand and scale to multiple distribution centers in the future.
I definitely agree with you. Scalability is definitely crucial for growth. Now, we are kind of running out of time. I want to make sure we leave enough time at the end for questions, but I do want to get some final advice from each of you. So, Steve, I'm going to kick it off to you first.
Sure. So, I two things that I really or one thing I highlighted and one other point I want to make. One, involve the whole business, and Greg also made this point too. It's very important that you do that and have your stakeholders involved and engaged. The second is crawl, walk, run, sprint when it comes to this. So one of the things I talked about was be able to do different business rules, configure it, constant configuration. All that is true, and you need all of those things. But that doesn't mean you have to go in and create this complex rule set for every package you ship and every order that you ship and every one of your sales channels day one. You can get complicated very fast, and I think it's very important that people understand while you have the capability of doing this, I think that you need to have some responsibilities in how you play with the levers of your software.
Excellent advice. Greg, how about you?
Yeah, so for me, it's there's an old saying, you don't know what you don't know. There's a lot of things that all of us have to learn from one another. So that's why I continue to go back to build out a network within the industry, make connections with other brands, share best practices, learn from one another. And then, to add on to one of the things that was mentioned at the beginning of this session is the days of single carrier shipping are gone. You need to be able to be flexible, build speed into your decision-making process, and be able to learn and grow with all these new carriers that are coming on board. There might be a fit out there that you just haven't taken into consideration yet.
Good advice. All right. Justin.
My piece of advice to everybody listening, include your vendors as part of your process, decision-making process, things of that nature. And when I say include, it should be more of a conversation. Again, our RFPs are great for seeing who has the tenacity to stick through and answer all the questions, but RFPs don't do a great job of truly helping you understand how that software should be implemented in your greater software stack. So, and then finally, timing matters. The later in the year you close that deal, regardless of what piece of enterprise software tech you're looking at, the less functionality you're going to be able to get in that first year if you have a Q4 peak.
And testing. Leave enough time for testing, right? All right.
Definitely testing. You do not want to test in Q4.
All right. So I just want to invite everyone again to submit those questions if you have them. There's a little question box in the top right corner. We did get a couple come through, so I just want to make sure everyone is aware. And we will just jump right into it. All right. First one I got here is from Angie. Greg, do you feel comfortable answering this? What ERP are you using?
We use SAP.
SAP. All right. Steve, we have one for you from Rod. When you were talking about that ROI piece, how do you measure that return on investment as it relates to year 3 and year 5 and so on?
Yeah, so obviously the further out you go, the harder measuring ROI is going to be. But there's a few factors that play into it. One, how does your shipping software price? So is it transactional based on number of shipments? Is it band? Is it a percentage of revenue? Or is it an enterprise license? Meaning, basically you can ship as many as the server can handle. Frankly, that's generally our preference when it comes to shipping is more of an enterprise license, because the last thing we want to do is have to potentially scale rates based on pricing and things like that, and it doesn't go good for anybody. So I think that's very important in that is to understand how it prices. Now that's your expense side. On the return on that expense side, there's a few factors. One, how is it going to impact things like customer satisfaction and things, survey scores like Net Promoter Score, for example. How does that impact that? Second, does it give you a competitive advantage in your space? Are you able to offer more than your competitors? And this is something that your marketing team can help with, is be able to say, okay, how, if we had this capability, how do you estimate what that would look like? And that's number 2. And then number 3 is a point that was brought up earlier by somebody, is how does the system scale? How does the solution scale from now in year 1, year 2? Because your company should have an idea of where you want to be in the future years. So how does it scale? Will you need to add, additional hardware? Will you need to add, some ancillary things related to it, such as mechanization in a facility or things like that based on getting capacity? So there's a few different factors that go into it. But you are right. What they think where you're going with this, it's going to be less accurate in year 5 than it will be in year 3. That is just the nature of that because, for example, when people were talking about ROIs for systems and software and all parts of the business in 2019, how many of them predicted, okay, what if we have a global pandemic? How does that impact everything? It's just the nature of that can be difficult, but it is healthy to go through that exercise to understand what you can capture.
Thank you, Steve. All right, this one I'm going to throw over to Greg, since it's probably fresher in your mind. Any lessons you learned from the implementation process that you would have done differently?
Sure. So one of the things that we have is a great IT team supporting us in the day-to-day operations for utilizing ProShip. And one of the things that we didn't necessarily understand was how do we implement our own business rules and manage the solution on a day-to-day basis from a managing up volume or controlling or capping volume. So there's just a little things of how-tos. So I think during the training portion of the onboarding, we learned that we should have asked more questions and implemented, or in terms of where we wanted to implement, how we wanted to implement, what things might come up over time. If we had a carrier that was underperforming, how do we quickly throttle the volume back on that particular carrier? So just a lot of little nuances like that we learned through implementation. And at this point in time, our IT user would probably be the biggest or best salesperson that there is out there for ProShip. She's a strong advocate for the team that is supporting her.
Great, thank you, Greg. And as a quick follow-up to that, and I'm not asking specifics, but the question is, could you have achieved the same savings without a multi-carrier shipping software that you're seeing today with your new facilities and all of that?
The answer is we might have been able to do it, but it would have taken us 3 years and $3 million of expense. So the ROI wouldn't have been there. We probably could have figured out a way to have the same multi-carrier solution in place, but it just would have taken a lot longer to get there. And it's certainly what we were using before and just going directly through our WMS. We just didn't have the speed and flexibility that we were looking for. And that really became apparent, I think, during the pandemic. You have to have that. And if you don't have it, then you're constantly at risk of something going wrong, one of the carriers failing, or even worse, potentially one of the carriers deciding they don't want to do business with you anymore and they cut you off. And that did happen during the pandemic with several customers that are several shippers that I know of.
Good advice there. Thank you for that answer. Justin, I didn't leave you out. I have one for you as well. This one's specific to ProShip. So what benefit does ProShip provide customer service teams inside of a retailer, a manufacturer, 3PL? And what benefits to perhaps the end consumer?
So a lot of that is going to come through its integration to the enterprise software stack and that ability to communicate, right? Maybe you want the carriers to send email notifications. That should go through the shipping software. You're definitely going to want to get tracking numbers, maybe tracking information that's going to go up into your CRM solution, maybe back into your e-commerce suite. So really, it's about moving the data. If you're gonna help customer service, if you're gonna inform your customers, if your customers are gonna self-inform on your website, that data needs to be moved up there. So right now, I've got a nice item on purchase. I continue to go back to that website and refresh it every single time. Well, if they were shipping with ProShip, as soon as that label was created, we'd be able to move the tracking number, move the information up into that e-commerce suite. So I would see it immediately. Maybe that's going to trigger something else in the CRM, like welcome emails or something of that nature. But it really is 100% about data movement helps inform other people.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. We are at the top of the hour, and I guess we can do one more question. And it relates to AI. So how is Gen AI disrupting the logistics software platform marketplace? And that is a mouthful.
I will take this one. So AI is good at things that cannot be calculated, right? So if you've got a straight up algorithm that needs to be calculated, like the cost of a shipment, that is not something for AI. AI is really about things that cannot be calculated because it's really a very advanced prediction solution, right? And so where I see AI in logistics is it's going to be very helpful in pick plans, put away plans, because there's not an answer. And more importantly, even if there was an answer, as soon as you get a new SKU in, as soon as you change labor, that answer is going to change. So if there's an answer that is not calculable, AI is going to help. When it comes to multi-carrier shipping software, I see only one place where that really helps, because you can't use AI to produce a UPS certified label. You can't use AI to calculate the postal shipping costs for something, right? But what you can do is you can use AI in order to help understand what the realistic time in transit might be. And I'm not saying the guaranteed time in transit, but what the realistic time in transit might be. As we see problems change as we see the environment change, maybe it's a weather event, maybe it's a Department of Transportation event like we see in Baltimore right now. Systems we see going forward that are going to predict time in transit will be taking those things into account and will be letting us know. So if I go and I order a set of Hey Dudes and I happen to be in the wrong part of Baltimore, if I'm in Miami and a hurricane is coming, I can see where the site would tell me, oh, well, you can pay for express shipping and get it the day before the hurricane shows up. Or if you go for free shipping or ground shipping or whatever the case may be, we're not going to be able to deliver that until 2 days after the hurricane because of the expected infrastructure impact. So that's where I see AI truly being able to come into play when it comes to multi-carrier shipping software. And of course, if you take that, if you can calculate it, keep it regular. If not, AI, you can turn that all the way up your logistics stack as necessary.
And with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining our webinar today and spending your valuable time with us. I'd like to thank the panelists as well. Thank you for joining. Everyone will be receiving a recording of this. You'll be getting it in an email. You'll be receiving also a guide that summarizes what was talked about today. So look for that. If you do have any questions, anything that didn't get answered, please reach out to ProShip at sales@proshipinc.com. Visit our website, call us. We'll be here waiting to answer any of those. So thank you all again, and I hope you have a good week.